Don't move your hands. Keep them where I can see them. The command cut through the quiet highway like a blade, sharp and immediate, as red and blue lights pulsed across the dark asphalt, reflecting off Danielle Brooks' windshield in restless waves, her fingers still resting lightly on the steering wheel, steady, controlled, as if the chaos outside hadn't reached her yet. But it had. She could feel it in the subtle tightening of her chest, in the way the air inside the car suddenly felt smaller, heavier. As Officer Ryan Keller approached from the driver's side with deliberate steps, his silhouette framed by flashing lights, posture rigid, eyes already locked with judgment before a single word had been exchanged, "Step out of the vehicle." He repeated, slower this time, firmer, as if the night itself was listening. Danielle turned her head slightly, not in defiance but in awareness, catching the reflection of another patrol car pulling in behind, tires crunching against gravel, doors opening, more presence, more pressure, the kind that builds before something breaks. But she didn't let it break her, not outwardly, not here, not now. In the back seat, a small voice trembled, soft but unmistakable. "Annie, what's happening?" And for just a second, Danielle's eyes flickered in the rearview mirror, meeting the wide, uncertain gaze of her niece, seatbelt still fastened, hands clutching a worn stuffed animal like it was the only stable thing left in the world. Danielle inhaled slowly, the kind of breath that anchors, that holds everything in place. And then she opened the door, carefully, deliberately, stepping out into the flashing light, the cool night air brushing against her face as the highway stretched empty on both sides, a long ribbon of silence interrupted only by the low hum of engines and the steady rhythm of authority. "Is there a reason I was pulled over, officer?" she asked, voice even, respectful, not raised, not trembling, just present. But the question seemed to hang in the air unanswered as Keller's expression hardened, his focus shifting not to her words but to her presence, her tone, her composure, things he didn't seem to expect. "License and registration," he replied, clipped, dismissive, already reaching for control instead of explanation. Danielle nodded once, turning slightly, careful with every movement, aware of how quickly calm could be mistaken, how easily stillness could be misunderstood. She reached back into the car, retrieving her documents with measured precision, every motion visible, every second stretched, the kind of seconds that feel longer under flashing lights, when the world narrows down to a single moment that hasn't decided what it wants to become yet. Around them, distant headlights slowed, drivers glancing over, curiosity building, a phone screen lighting up somewhere in the dark, capturing fragments of a story no one fully understood yet. Danielle handed over the documents, her fingers steady, her posture upright, dignity intact even as the situation tilted. Keller took them without a word, glancing down briefly, then back at her, and in that look, something unspoken passed, something that had nothing to do with a traffic stop and everything to do with assumption, with perception, with a story already written in his mind. Danielle didn't react, didn't push, didn't retreat. She simply stood there under the pulsing lights, breathing evenly, waiting, while somewhere behind her, her niece's quiet voice whispered again, smaller this time, "Are we in trouble?" And for the first time, the silence between each flashing light felt louder than any answer that hadn't come yet. Danielle stood beneath the revolving wash of red and blue light as the night seemed to slow around her, each second stretching thin, while Officer Keller walked back toward his patrol car with her documents in hand, his radio crackling softly at his shoulder, the faint murmur of another officer exchanging quiet words just out of earshot. And still Danielle did not move, her posture steady, shoulders relaxed, hands visible, not because she was told to, but because she understood how moments like this could turn on the smallest misunderstanding. Behind her, the car door remained slightly open, and the soft glow from the interior lights spilled onto the pavement, framing her niece's small silhouette in the back seat. The child leaning forward just enough to see past the headrest, eyes wide, trying to read a situation no child should have to interpret. Danielle's gaze flicked back briefly, offering a calm that was more intentional than natural, a silent reassurance shaped through years of knowing when to speak and when to simply hold the moment together. Across the road, a passing vehicle slowed, then another, the quiet ripple of attention building as more headlights lingered a second too long. A phone raised from a distance. Then another, small glowing rectangles capturing fragments of a scene without context, without history, just the surface of something deeper. Keller returned after what felt longer than it was, his expression unchanged, unreadable, the documents still in his hand, but now held with a different weight, like they had not confirmed what he expected, like they had asked a question he was not ready to answer. "Step over here," he said, gesturing toward the front of the patrol car. His tone controlled but firmer now, less about procedure and more about command. Danielle followed without resistance, her steps measured on the rough asphalt, the faint sound of gravel shifting under her shoes grounding her in the physical space of the moment. She stopped where indicated, the headlights casting a bright, almost clinical light across her face, removing shadows, removing softness, leaving only clarity. Keller glanced down at the license again, then back up at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to align the person in front of him with something that did not quite match. "Where are you coming from tonight?" he asked, not aggressively, but not neutrally either. Danielle answered simply. "Work," her voice steady, unembellished, offering no more than what was necessary, the kind of answer that neither challenged nor submitted, just existed. Keller paused, his thumb tapping lightly against the edge of the card, a small motion but one that carried impatience, uncertainty, maybe even doubt. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, louder this time, a voice requesting confirmation, numbers being repeated, a name spoken once, then again, and Danielle heard it, her own name carried through static, reshaped by distance, by protocol, by the system that now surrounded her. She did not react, not outwardly, but something shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable, like the moment just before a storm changes direction. Keller turned slightly, responding into the radio with clipped words, his tone no longer as certain as before. The second officer near the cruiser glanced over, then back at the screen inside the vehicle, the glow illuminating his face as he leaned closer, reading more carefully now, as if the details mattered more than they had a minute ago. Danielle stood still, breathing evenly, aware of the shift but not chasing it, not forcing it, because moments like this revealed themselves only when allowed to unfold. Behind her the small voice came again, softer now but clearer in the quiet that had settled. "Auntie, are we okay?" And Danielle closed her eyes for the briefest second, not in fear, not in hesitation, but in grounding, in choosing once again to remain exactly who she was in a moment that seemed determined to define her as something else. And when she opened them, the flashing lights no longer felt like pressure. They felt like a spotlight waiting for the truth to step into it. The radio did not just crackle this time. It held, a thin thread of sound stretching across the silence as the second officer leaned closer into the glow of the patrol car screen, his posture shifting from routine to intent, fingers slowing as they scrolled, reading, rereading, while Officer Keller stood a few feet from Danielle, still holding her license but no longer looking at it the same way, his eyes flicking between the card and her face as if the two no longer aligned, as if something in the system had quietly rewritten the narrative he had already decided on. "Dispatch, confirm spelling," the other officer said, voice lower now, more careful, each letter spoken clearly into the night. "Danielle Brooks," repeated once, then again, and the response came back slower than before, deliberate, layered with a tone that carried weight even through static. "Affirmative, stand by." And for a moment, everything seemed to pause. Not just the officers, not just Danielle, but the entire stretch of highway holding its breath under the rotating lights. A distant car rolled past, but even that felt muted, like the world had dimmed its volume to listen. Danielle remained where she was, shoulders relaxed, chin level, her breathing steady and quiet, not forcing anything, not reacting to the shift she could feel building beneath the surface. Because she had learned long ago that truth did not need volume, it only needed space. Behind her the interior light of the car still glowed softly, outlining her niece's small figure now sitting very still, no longer asking questions, just watching, sensing that something had changed even if she could not name it. Keller turned slightly, glancing toward his partner, then back at Danielle, the firmness in his posture still there, but no longer anchored in certainty, More like something held together out of habit, just routine, he said, though the words sounded less like reassurance and more like something he was telling himself. The other officer stepped out from the patrol car, the screen light fading from his face as he approached, his expression not confrontational, not apologetic, but focused, as if he had just read something that required recalibration. "Sir," he said quietly to Keller, just loud enough to carry, just soft enough to shift the air between them. Keller leaned in slightly, listening, and whatever was said next did not need to be heard to be understood, because the reaction came first, subtle but unmistakable, a tightening of the jaw, a pause that lasted half a second too long, eyes narrowing not in suspicion but in realization, the kind that arrives all at once and does not ask permission. Danielle watched without staring, aware without pressing, allowing the moment to reveal itself at its own pace. The radio came alive again, clearer now, sharper, identity confirmed, federal-level clearance attached. And the words did not echo, they settled, heavy and final, landing in the space that had been filled with assumption only moments ago. Keller straightened slightly, the card in his hand no longer just a license, but something else entirely, something that reframed everything that had just happened and everything that was about to follow. The flashing lights continued their rhythm, but now they illuminated a different scene, one where the balance had shifted, not through force, not through confrontation, but through quiet truth stepping into view. Danielle did not move, did not speak. She simply stood there as the weight of that truth settled around them. And for the first time since the lights appeared in her rearview mirror, the silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt like something waiting to be acknowledged. The shift did not come with raised voices or sudden movement. It came in the quiet way Officer Keller adjusted his stance, the subtle straightening of his back as if the ground beneath him had changed without warning, the license still in his hand, now held more carefully, no longer just an object, but a realization he could not ignore. The other officer stepped slightly to the side, giving space not out of instruction but out of instinct, as if the moment itself required it. Keller cleared his throat, a small sound that seemed louder in the stillness. "Ma'am," he began, but the word landed differently than before, stripped of assumption, carrying a weight that had not been there minutes ago. Danielle did not interrupt, did not rush to respond. She simply watched, her expression calm, composed, the same quiet presence she had maintained from the start, but now it filled the space instead of being questioned by it. The flashing lights continued their steady rhythm, casting alternating colors across their faces, but the tension that once lived in that light had softened, replaced by something more deliberate, more aware. Keller glanced briefly toward his partner, then back at Danielle, the hesitation in that glance revealing more than any explanation could. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," he said finally, the sentence measured, careful, each word chosen as if stepping across uncertain ground. Danielle let the silence hold for a second after he finished, not to challenge him, not to make him uncomfortable, but because she understood the power of letting truth settle without interruption. "A misunderstanding usually has a beginning," she replied gently, her voice even, not sharp, not accusing, just clear, and the words did not escalate the moment. They clarified it. Keller exhaled quietly, the kind of breath that comes when something internal shifts, when certainty is replaced by reflection. He handed the license back, slower than before, the gesture no longer procedural but intentional. Danielle accepted it with the same steady composure, her fingers brushing the edge of the card as she took it back, grounding herself again in the reality of the moment. Behind her the car door creaked slightly as her knees shifted, the small movement drawing attention back to what had always been there, a child watching, learning, absorbing everything that had just unfolded. Keller's eyes followed that movement briefly, then returned to Danielle, and for the first time there was something else in his expression, not authority, not suspicion, but recognition, not of who she was on paper, but of what he had not seen before. The other officer stepped forward slightly, his tone quieter, more measured. "You are free to go," he said, but even that felt incomplete, like the words were not enough to account for everything that had just happened. Danielle nodded once, acknowledging without dramatizing, without turning the moment into something louder than it needed to be. She turned toward her car, each step calm, Unhurried, the sound of her shoes against the asphalt steady and grounded. As she reached the open door, she paused for just a fraction of a second, her hand resting lightly on the frame, the interior light illuminating her face again, softening the edges of the moment. Her niece looked up at her, eyes searching, and Danielle offered a small, reassuring smile, the kind that says more than words ever could. She closed the door gently, the sound final but not heavy, as she walked around to the driver's side. The flashing lights still painted the scene in color, but now they felt distant, like something already fading into memory. And as she opened the door and prepared to step back into the driver's seat, the night seemed to return to its natural rhythm, quiet, open, but not unchanged, because something had shifted in the space they all shared, something that would not disappear as easily as the lights once they turned off. Danielle settled into the driver's seat with a quiet sense of control returning to her hands, the steering wheel familiar beneath her fingers as the interior of the car wrapped around her like something steady and known, the door closing with a soft, final click that separated her from the tension outside. For a moment she did not start the engine. She just sat there, breathing evenly, letting the silence inside the car replace the noise of flashing lights and unspoken assumptions. In the back seat, her niece leaned forward slightly, her small voice careful but curious. "Are we really okay now?" And Danielle glanced at her through the rearview mirror, her eyes soft but grounded. "Yes, we are," she said gently, the kind of answer that carried both reassurance and truth, not because nothing had happened, but because they had made it through without losing themselves in it. Outside, the patrol lights still pulsed, but they no longer felt dominant. They felt distant, like something already fading. Officer Keller stood a few steps away from the car, his posture no longer rigid, his arms resting at his sides instead of near his belt, watching in silence as Danielle prepared to leave, not out of control, but out of something closer to reflection, as if the moment had shifted from enforcement to understanding and he was still catching up to it. Danielle reached for the ignition, then paused, her hand resting lightly on the key, not hesitating out of fear, but out of awareness. There are moments that pass quickly and disappear, and then there are moments that ask to be acknowledged before they close. She opened the door again, stepping back out into the cool night air, the movement unexpected but calm, the gravel beneath her shoes sounding softer now. Keller looked up, surprised but attentive, and for a brief second neither of them spoke, the space between them no longer tense but still significant. Danielle met his gaze directly, not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity. "What happened tonight?" she said quietly, her voice steady and measured. "Is the kind of moment that defines more than just a stop on the road." The words did not accuse. They revealed. Keller listened, his expression shifting slightly, the weight of her words landing without resistance. Danielle continued, "Not because of who I am, but because of how quickly assumptions can take the place of facts." The flashing lights reflected faintly across her face as she spoke, but they no longer framed her. They simply existed. Around her, Keller nodded slowly, the motion small but genuine. "I understand," he said, though the words carried the humility of someone who was still learning what that understanding truly meant. Danielle held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod of her own, not as acceptance, not as dismissal, but as acknowledgement that something had shifted, something that could not be undone but could be carried forward differently. She turned back toward her car, stepping inside once more, this time without pause, the engine starting with a low, steady hum, the headlights cutting forward into the open road ahead. As she pulled away, the patrol lights remained behind her, growing smaller in the rearview mirror, their colors blending into the distance until they were no longer distinct, just a fading glow against the dark. Her niece leaned back into her seat, quieter now, processing in her own way, and Danielle kept her eyes on the road, the lines stretching ahead under the night sky, calm, continuous, unchanged in their direction. But something within her had settled deeper, not shaken, not hardened, just clearer, because the road had not changed, but the moment they had just passed through had, and it would not be forgotten as easily as the lights that disappeared behind them. The highway stretched out ahead in long, quiet lines as Danielle drove steadily at just under 50 miles per hour, the hum of the engine soft and consistent beneath the silence that filled the car. Not an empty silence, but one that held everything that had just happened, settling slowly into something deeper, something that would stay long after the night ended. Her niece shifted slightly in the back seat, the small rustle of fabric breaking the stillness before her voice came again, softer now, thoughtful instead of afraid. Why did they think something was wrong? And the question lingered in the air, simple in its words but heavy in its meaning. Danielle did not answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the road, the faint glow of streetlights passing rhythmically across the windshield, each one lighting the interior for just a second before fading, like breaths marking time. She adjusted her grip on the wheel, not out of tension but out of presence, choosing her words carefully, because some answers are not just explanations, they are foundations. Sometimes, she began gently, her voice calm and steady. People decide what they see before they really look. Her niece was quiet, listening, processing. Danielle continued. And when that happens, it can take time for the truth to catch up. The child leaned her head slightly against the seat, eyes forward now, watching the road as if trying to understand it through motion. But you stayed calm, she said after a moment, not as a question but as an observation. Danielle allowed a small, almost invisible smile to touch her expression. Staying calm does not mean nothing is happening, she replied softly. It means you choose what happens inside you, no matter what is happening around you. The words settled gently between them, not heavy, not forced, just present. Outside the car, the world moved on as if nothing had occurred. Distant traffic flowed, lights blinked in and out along the roadside, and the sky above remained wide and indifferent. But inside the car, something had shifted into clarity. Danielle's thoughts drifted briefly, not away from the road but inward, revisiting the moment not with anger but with awareness. The way Officer Keller's voice had changed, the pause before recognition, the quiet space where assumption had given way to fact, and she did not hold on to it as something to carry with bitterness. She held it as something to understand, because moments like that were not isolated, they were part of something larger, something that required more than reaction. It required presence, discipline, and a kind of strength that did not announce itself. Her niece spoke again, this time with a trace of curiosity returning. Were you scared? Danielle's eyes softened slightly as she considered the question, the road stretching endlessly ahead. I was aware, she answered honestly. And awareness helps you stay grounded. The child nodded slowly, accepting the answer in the way children do, not needing every detail, just enough to feel steady again. The car moved forward through the night, smooth and uninterrupted now, the earlier lights gone completely, replaced by the quiet rhythm of travel. And as Danielle continued driving, her reflection faintly visible in the windshield, calm, composed, unwavering. The moment behind her no longer felt like something unresolved. It felt like something understood, not finished, but placed exactly where it belonged, in the past, carried forward only as wisdom, not weight. The city lights began to rise in the distance, faint at first, then gradually forming a horizon of quiet gold against the dark sky as Danielle guided the car off the highway and onto a slower road lined with trees and street lamps spaced like steady markers of time. The rhythm of the drive changing, softer now, more grounded. Her niece had grown quiet in the back seat, not asleep, just thoughtful. The kind of silence that comes when something important has settled in but has not fully formed into words yet. Danielle noticed it without turning, her awareness extending beyond the road, beyond the moment, as it always did, because she understood that what had happened earlier was not just an event, it was something that would echo, not loudly, but persistently, shaping how a young mind understood the world. The car slowed to a stop at a red light, the soft glow washing over the dashboard and reflecting faintly across Danielle's face, her hands resting calmly on the wheel, her posture unchanged, composed as ever. But beneath that composure was something deeper, a clarity that had sharpened, not because of who she was on paper, not because of a title or position, but because of the way she had chosen to stand in a moment that could have pulled her into something else, something reactive, something louder, but she had not allowed that. The light remained red, a pause in motion that felt intentional, as if the night itself had given her space to reflect. Her niece spoke again, her voice small but steady. Will it happen again? And the question did not carry fear this time. It carried awareness. Danielle exhaled slowly, her gaze still forward, watching the intersection, the empty lanes stretching left and right. It might, she answered. Honestly, not shielding the truth, but not weighing it down either. But what matters is how you meet it when it does. The child shifted slightly, absorbing that. The world outside the windshield remained still, the red light holding. Then after a moment it changed, green replacing red with quiet certainty. Danielle pressed the accelerator gently, the car moving forward again, smooth, controlled, as if following a path already known. And in many ways it was, because she had walked this kind of path before. Not the exact road, not the exact night, but the same underlying current, the same tension between perception and truth, the same opportunity to respond with something stronger than reaction. Her thoughts moved briefly back to the officer's face in that final moment, not as an image of authority, but as a moment of recognition, the kind that changes something small but real, and she did not carry it as resentment. She carried it as evidence that even in tension, there was space for shift, for understanding, for something to move in a better direction. The car turned onto a quieter street now, lined with houses dimly lit from within, windows glowing softly like reminders of lives continuing behind them. Danielle's niece leaned her head gently against the window, watching the passing lights blur into lines, and Danielle allowed herself a small breath, not of relief, but of completion, because the moment had reached its turning point, not in confrontation, not in escalation, but in realization. And as the car moved deeper into the calm of the neighborhood, the night no longer felt heavy. It felt open, like something that had made space for truth to pass through it, leaving behind. Not noise, not conflict, but something quieter, something lasting, something that would not need to announce itself to be remembered. The car rolled gently into the driveway, tires crunching softly over gravel as the engine quieted to a low hum before Danielle turned it off completely. The sudden stillness settling around them like a soft curtain, different from the silence on the highway. This one was familiar, safe, filled with the quiet presence of home, porch lights glowing warmly against the dark, windows lit from within, steady and unchanged. Danielle remained seated for a moment, her hands resting lightly on the wheel. As she let the stillness fully arrive, not rushing to move, not rushing to speak, just allowing the night to return to something ordinary. In the back seat her niece unbuckled slowly, the small click of the seatbelt sounding louder than expected in the calm. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle, no longer uncertain but thoughtful. "You did not get mad," she said, not as a question, but as something she had been holding on to. Danielle turned slightly in her seat, meeting her eyes, the faint glow from the porch light illuminating her expression, calm, steady, present. Getting mad would not have changed what they thought in that moment. She replied quietly, her voice carrying no judgment, only clarity. The child considered that, her brow furrowing just slightly as she tried to understand something deeper than words. Danielle continued, "But how I responded might change what they remember after." The words settled softly, not heavy, not forced, just true. She opened the car door and stepped out, the cool night air brushing against her face as she closed the door behind her, the sound gentle, final. Her niece followed, stepping onto the driveway, small shoes meeting the ground with a quiet tap. The two of them walking side by side toward the front door, their shadows stretching briefly under the porch light before settling closer as they reached the steps. Danielle paused with her hand near the door, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness of the moment closing, of something important having passed between them. "People will not always see you clearly right away," she said softly, not looking down but speaking forward, as if placing the words into the space they both stood in. "But you never have to become unclear just because they do." Her niece looked up at her, eyes steady now, something inside them more grounded than before, not because the world had changed, but because she had been shown how to stand in it. Danielle opened the door, warm light spilling out into the night as they stepped inside, the door closing gently behind them, sealing the quiet of the house around them, the outside world fading into the distance, not erased, but placed where it belonged. And in that space, the moment from earlier did not linger as tension, it remained as something else, something quieter, something stronger, something that would stay long after the night ended without needing to be spoken again. The house settled into a quiet rhythm as the door clicked shut behind them. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of floorboards, the distant ticking of a wall clock blending into a calm that felt untouched by everything that had happened just an hour before. Danielle set her keys gently on the small wooden table by the entrance, the soft clink grounding the moment in something ordinary, something steady. Her niece slipped off her shoes and padded a few steps into the living room. Before pausing, turning back as if something was still unfinished, not outside, but inside her thoughts, Danielle noticed it immediately, the way she always did, and followed at a quiet distance, giving space without leaving presence. The lamp in the corner cast a warm glow across the room, soft shadows stretching along the walls, wrapping everything in a sense of stillness that invited reflection rather than distraction. The child stood near the couch, her small hands resting at her sides. "Are they going to remember you?" she asked, the question simple but carrying a depth that reached beyond the moment. Danielle stepped closer, not too fast, not too slow, her expression calm as she lowered herself slightly to meet her at eye level. "Yes," she answered gently. "But not because of who I am." She paused just long enough for the words to settle. "They will remember how they treated me." The child's eyes held hers, absorbing that, not fully understanding every layer, but feeling the truth of it. Danielle reached out and gently adjusted a strand of hair from her niece's face, the gesture soft, grounding. "And maybe next time," she added quietly, "that memory will help them see someone else more clearly." The room remained still around them, the kind of silence that does not demand to be filled, but allows meaning to deepen. Her niece nodded slowly, then leaned into her, wrapping her arms around Danielle in a quiet embrace, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Danielle returned the hug gently, one hand resting against the child's back, steady and reassuring, her eyes drifting for a moment toward the window, where the night outside stretched calm and unchanged, no flashing lights, no raised voices, just the quiet presence of a world continuing as it always had, but something within it had shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to matter, enough to carry forward. After a moment, the child pulled back, calmer now, lighter, and walked toward her room without another word, her steps soft against the floor. Danielle remained where she was, standing in the warm light, her hands now resting loosely at her sides, her breath even, her posture relaxed, not from relief, but from resolution. She walked slowly to the window, looking out into the night, the street still, the houses quiet, the world unchanged on the surface. And yet she knew that moments like the one she had just lived did not disappear. They echoed, not loudly, not all at once, but in small ways, in future choices, in subtle shifts of awareness, in the quiet recognition that something could have gone differently. And next time, maybe it would. Danielle exhaled softly, not as release, but as acknowledgement, then turned off the lamp, the room dimming into a gentle darkness. And as she walked down the hallway, the house settling around her, the story did not end with what had happened on the road. It continued in what had been understood, in what had been carried forward without anger, without noise. Just truth, quiet and steady, like a light that does not need to be seen to exist.